So today I'm going to be talking about Winston Churchill's famous "We shall fight on the beaches" speech made on June 4th, 1940, in front of the House of Commons. Well, a bit of context: on May 26th, the whole evacuation of Dunkirk happened. The RAF denied the enemy, so Germany, any aerial supremacy, and around 338,000 troops reached England, including 26,000 French forces. The speech was made to not only check the mood of national euphoria and belief, but also to kind of make an appeal to the US, because by this point, America hadn't become involved at all in the war. Then by September of that year, they would start sending in weapons, and then by December of the next year, they would join the war. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tell you a quote from the speech and explain it a little bit, and then I'm going to read the famous part of the speech. So, first of all, in the speech, Churchill says, German eruption swept like a sharp scythe around the right and rear of the armies of the North. Well, around 8 or 9 armored divisions of around 400 armored vehicles each had cut off communications between the British and the main French armies. These armored divisions were obviously German, and they were trying to cut off communications because if they couldn't communicate, they couldn't function properly and counter an attack. Well, at the same this happened, and then a little while later, more Germans came in lorries, and then the main German army started coming to where they were. So they almost reached Dunkirk. They didn't actually reach it, but they were really, really close. If you've seen the movie Dunkirk, at the beginning they do show how when they're trying to reach the beach, there are some German troops firing at them. So there were Germans firing at the British and the French and the Belgians. Well, the two main fighting grounds during this whole thing were Calais and Boulogne, and there was a lot of resistance in Calais, but in Boulogne it was defended for a while, but then they started retreating after a bit. After this happened, 2 additional armored divisions were sent by the Germans to Calais to help there. And Churchill, in the speech, he actually says that this is kind of good because these armored divisions could have been sent to the front lines, but instead they were just sent to target Calais. Well, the British, French, and Belgians, they were close to surrendering near Dunkirk. So it was one point where it didn't look good for the Allies. It looked like the Germans were kind of winning the whole thing. And King Leopold of Belgium returned a previous favor the British had done by defending the only line of retreat to the sea. There was this one point where the British, French, and Belgians could fall back on, but there was a lot of Germans around. And so the Belgian army, they defended this area because of a favor the British had done for them. And the Belgians eventually ended up surrendering to the Germans, so that didn't really help. And all this context relates to the quote. I'm going to repeat it again. German eruption swept like a sharp scythe around the right and rear of the armies of the North. Essentially, Churchill is saying that Germans were just the scythe is its death's weapon. They were just cutting through the French, British, and Belgian lines, and they were separating. They were coming from the side, from the back. The army, the French, Belgian, and British army, they were kind of trapped. That's essentially what they're saying, and that the Germans were just cutting through and essentially killing them. Which at the beginning it did look like that was what was happening. Then, along the same lines, Churchill says, and I quote, "The enemy attacked on all sides with great strength and fierceness." It's just kind of continuing the first quote. So, the Germans were relentless. The Luftwaffe at this point was kind of superior to the RAF. they had to, I mean, some of them were either in battle, like in actual war. I mean, I'm not saying Dunkirk wasn't part of the war, but okay, they were either in battle or not in Dunkirk, if that makes sense. Well, the Luftwaffe planes that were in Dunkirk, they made like heavy fire over the beaches, so like bombing and shooting to try and kill as many troops. Because I mean, a lot of troops were on the beach, so they could kill as many as possible. And that would really help them. Well, in the seas and channels, they even placed mines. So if any of the troops managed to get on the boats, they would be blown up. I mean, as I said at the beginning, over 300,000 troops ended up passing, like ended up reaching England. So like, it didn't really work, but hey, they tried. And well, these Luftwaffe planes that attacked the beaches sometimes were over 100 planes strong, and like, despite like the planes and the cannon fire and whatever, well, they had the U-boats, so submarines, um, like hurting evacuation boats. So if any boat managed to go through and pass an area with a landmine and it still hadn't gone down, the U-boats would try and sink them. But one U-boat was sunk by the British. That was kind of good. And by the way, well, the attack on the beaches it was the only place the Allied troops could retreat from, so could retreat to. So that was like the German aim, to try and make that escape impossible. So they had no choice. Well, the Germans also sent artillery and infantry to like against the British and the French. By this point, by the way, the Belgians already had abandoned. And well, there were hospital ships from the British who were clearly marked, so they wouldn't be hurt by enemy ships. Not enemy ships, but like their own ships, and especially enemy ships, because you're supposed to respect a medical institution, representative in war. Like, you're not supposed to kill someone who's only there for healing purposes. It's like they weren't supposed to shut down the boats, the medical boats. Well, the Germans did, and they even became targets because they contain a lot of vulnerable people who they knew if they shot down, they wouldn't be able to swim back, and also they were clearly marked. Well, at one point, the RAF said, "Hey, why don't we just get our stuff together and actually try and defeat the Luftwaffe?" So at one point, the RAF started striking down German bombers and fighters that were protecting the bombers. Well, the British and French, some of them were forced to retreat. So at the same time, the Germans were they were hurled back. And well, the battle between the RAF and the Luftwaffe continued going, and ended up, so for every plane of the RAF that went down, one plane, 4 Luftwaffe planes went down. That is really impressive, considering the Luftwaffe had been superior right at the beginning. And so, linking it back to the original quote, the enemy attacked on all sides with great strength and fierceness. Well, this shows how, like, with the U-boats, with the landmines, with the sea mines, whatever, this huge, like, shows of strength. And fierceness is like, whatever you do, we're gonna try and kill you. So, like, don't do anything because we need to kill you, but even if you try to escape, we're still gonna kill you. Then, the next quote would be, "Our losses in material are enormous." Now, Churchill here, he refers to material losses, so like guns and vehicles. But, yeah. So they lost in the whole Dunkirk thing around 1,000 guns and all vehicles in the north of France. And I mean, at the same time, they had lost around 30,000 British men. The French army, well, and being really weakened, they had suffered a lot. A lot of the fighting was happening in France, and that's kind of why. And so the Belgian army, They didn't desert, they just surrendered, and they had to like sorry, had to stop fighting against the Germans. So the Belgian army was no longer useful. And then the last quote that I'm gonna say is, "We have found it necessary to take measures of increasing strength, increasing stringency, increasing stringency." Now, what this means is that, I mean, what this means and what actually happened was that, well, the fight, it wasn't only against the Germans. It was against Germany, against the enemy, but also against any suspicious characters of other nationalities. So anyone who was suspected of helping the Germans. Also, those in Britain who could pose an obstacle if Hitler were to invade, and people would actually try and support Hitler. These would be an obstacle to the British securing Britain. So these would be also, I mean, Churchill recognized how they need to deal with these people, and then also those sympathetic to Germany. So if you were thinking, hey, I don't think the Germans should be treated this bad, then they need to take care of you. That's essentially it. I mean, found it necessary to take measures of increasing stringency. So like, before it would just be the enemy, then anyone with sympathies. It gradually increased. And then the famous quote. I'm not gonna explain this one because I mean I'm just gonna let you do that. But this is the most famous Churchill quote, I think. And it goes, "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France, and we shall fight in the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills, and we shall never surrender." And that is the famous like, never surrender. We shall fight them on the beaches. We shall fight them on the landing grounds. It comes from this speech. Remember, June 4th, 1940. And that's pretty much it. Like, there's not much I can say. It's like one speech, but it's the most famous speech Winston Churchill ever gave, and it's the most popularized one. Even it does say, like, many people associate this speech with the darkest hour, the the finest. I think it's the finest hour, but it's not the same one. These are two different speeches. This is called "We Shall Fight on the Beaches," and yeah, that's pretty much it. There's really not much I can say. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, thank you for watching. Bye.